Cleveland woke up to news that felt more like a bombshell than a football adjustment. After weeks of drama, whispers, and mounting pressure, ownership finally stepped in. And in a move that nobody, not players, not coaches, not fans, thought they'd ever see, Jimmy Haslam overruled his own head coach. Shedeur Sanders wasn't just promoted. He was installed as the Browns' starting quarterback, effective immediately. This wasn't a depth chart tweak. It wasn't the standard hot hand switch that happens quietly across the NFL every season. This was an organizational earthquake. The head coach's power stripped away, chain of command shredded, and a rookie quarterback suddenly carrying not just a team, but the full weight of a franchise divided down the middle. The breaking point came after Cleveland's humiliating loss to the Baltimore Ravens. Sources inside the facility describe Haslam himself arriving before dawn, storming into what was supposed to be a routine coaches meeting. Instead, it turned into a 90-minute showdown behind closed doors. Voices raised, staff members hovering nervously outside. And by the time the door opened again, the announcement was ready. Sanders was the starter. Gabriel demoted. Stefanski's authority unraveled right in front of the building he was supposed to run. It was the kind of intervention rarely seen in professional football. Owners, even the most notorious ones, are usually careful to stay hands-off in matters of personnel. But this wasn't about patience anymore. The fan base, the business community, and even Sanders' teammates were all pushing in the same direction. Let the rookie play. Riding with Gabriel had delivered the league's worst quarterback rating and an offense drowning teammates' efforts. The city was restless. Ownership finally snapped. And here's the difference that makes this moment historic. By overruling his coach, Haslam didn't just decide who would play quarterback. He triggered a total shift in how the Browns function day to day. Assistants stunned into silence. Coordinators suddenly bypassing their head coach to take orders directly from front office execs. A locker room that had been divided, now openly celebrating. Even the receivers wasted no time. They reportedly set up an unsanctioned workout with Sanders the very night of the announcement. Meanwhile, Sanders himself carried it all with composure that felt far beyond his years. Instead of celebrating publicly or looking for payback, he walked into meetings, opened the playbook, and addressed the team as if he'd been the starter all along. Professional, focused, calm. It was exactly what Cleveland wanted to see, and exactly what opponents didn't. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a quarterback switch. This was a seismic rewiring of the Browns as an organization. A rare live on-air shift where ownership tossed aside the usual hierarchy and rewrote the team's reality in one stroke. Fans who had already given up on the season were suddenly flooding bars downtown to celebrate like Cleveland had punched the playoff ticket. Social media ignited. Hashtags trended nationally, and the ticket market flipped overnight. The Packers matchup, which had been undersold, spiked hundreds of dollars above face value. It was a decision that ripped apart the coaching staff, re-energized the locker room, and reignited an entire city. But here's the catch. While Sanders gained his shot, the Browns may have just opened the door to an even more complicated battle. Because when ownership strips a coach of control, especially in front of the world, it never ends with just a new starter. And that's where this story truly begins. The Ravens' beatdown wasn't just another ugly loss in a city used to disappointment. It was the kind of humiliation that seared into ownership's consciousness. Sunday night ended with boos raining down, fans streaming out early, and cameras lingering on Shedeur Sanders' expressionless face on the sideline. By Monday morning, it was clear. This wasn't sustainable. At 6 a.m., long before players reported, Browns staffers spotted something unusual in the facility parking lot. Jimmy Haslam's personal SUV. The owner usually kept his distance from routine football operations, preferring to make calls through senior executives. But here he was, storming into the building before anyone else. That alone set the tone. This wasn't a quick pep talk. This was an intervention. Inside, the day was supposed to begin with coaches reviewing tape of Sunday's 31-10 collapse. Instead, he was walking into a room where decisions had already been made. What happened next was sealed behind that glass wall, but multiple sources pieced together the picture. It was an hour and a half of arguments, some whispered, some loud enough for nearby staff to hear fragments through the floor. Haslam reportedly opened with blistering questions. Why had Sanders been buried all season, despite outperforming Gabriel in every practice metric? How long could the front office justify ticket holders fleeing, sponsors wavering, and TV partners leaking frustration behind closed doors? How much longer could the coach cling to development timelines while the product crumbled on the field? Stefanski fought back. He defended his plan, insisting rookies needed time. He argued that throwing Sanders into the fire too soon risked stunting his growth. He even cited the weight of franchise history as cautionary evidence. Quarterbacks rushed too fast and ruined by chaos. To him, protecting Sanders was strategy, not stubbornness. But ownership wasn't buying it anymore. Haslam's tone turned from frustrated to final. The coach had been given autonomy, but autonomy had led to dysfunction, empty seats, and angry chants. Enough was enough. What leaked next shocked even hardened veterans of NFL politics. Stefanski was told point-blank that Sanders would start immediately, not next week, not in a cautious drives-only scenario. Starting quarterback, full stop. Gabriel was demoted. Offensive staff would report game plan adjustments directly to Barry and Haslam's office. For the first time in his NFL tenure, Kevin Stefanski had been stripped of the most important power a coach holds, the right to decide who plays quarterback. When the doors opened around 8:30 a.m., insiders said Stefanski exited the suite stone-faced, clutching a notepad but speaking to no one. Minutes later, an internal memo circulated to coaches and staff, formally announcing the quarterback change. By mid-morning, it was public. The shockwaves rolled instantly. Staffers described a stunned silence across offensive meetings. Some assistants reportedly wondered aloud if they should resign. The quarterback coach even considered stepping out before Sanders himself requested he stay. A gesture that demonstrated unusual rookie maturity in the middle of chaos. In less than 2 hours, the entire power structure of the Browns had shifted. Ownership didn't just meddle, they seized control. Stefanski's authority collapsed in plain sight. The locker room erupted in whispers of "finally," while the city outside lit up in celebration. It was an extraordinary morning, one that insiders are already calling the most pivotal non-game moment in modern Browns history. One meeting, 90 minutes, and everything changed. But for all the relief and excitement around Sanders, one question remained. What would happen now to a head coach who just got publicly overruled by the man writing his checks? The quarterback announcement didn't just rewire the depth chart, it detonated years of carefully managed coaching authority. For the Browns staff, it was like someone had yanked the foundation out from under the building and told them to keep smiling. From day one, Kevin Stefanski's leadership style had thrived on structure. He didn't scream on the sideline, didn't trade in theatrics. He believed in consistency, protocols for meetings, predictable delegation, and a chain of command that, at least in theory, protected cohesion. That chain snapped the moment Jimmy Haslam walked past him into the owner's conference room and announced Sanders as the starter. By Monday afternoon, assistants were whispering about one thing. Who's really in charge now? The ripples were immediate. Staff meetings that day felt surreal. Stefanski entered with his usual calm exterior, but everyone could see the strain. A source present described the atmosphere as like watching someone try to conduct an orchestra after half the musicians turned toward a different conductor. Instead of Stefanski handing down instructions, word filtered in that certain offensive staffers would now be reporting directly to the front office. Play-calling duties, traditionally guarded, and personnel groupings were suddenly open to intervention. Offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt was quietly handed more freedom, not by Stefanski, but by executives communicating ownership's expectations. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. For assistants, this wasn't just about X's and O's. This was about reputation. Coaches live and die on the perception that they're aligned, professional, and in control. To suddenly be bypassed by executives raised an existential career question. Stay loyal to a head coach whose voice was diminishing, or align themselves with ownership and risk being cast as opportunists if Stefanski somehow survived. One assistant reportedly said privately, "You don't want your name attached to the wrong side of a sinking ship." That's how fragile the climate had become. Even more unsettling was the talk of resignations. Multiple insiders claimed the quarterback coach, frustrated at being undermined, seriously floated walking away. Only one thing stopped him: Sanders himself. Apparently, the rookie requested his coach remain, telling him flatly he needed continuity, that he valued his guidance, and that quitting would only fracture the team further. For a first-year player to steady a coach's hand, that painted Sanders as no ordinary rookie. At the same time, Stefanski's professionalism deserved note. Despite being publicly undermined, he still conducted staff meetings, still tried to maintain order, and still defended his assistants from finger-pointing. But the cracks showed. Reports say longtime colleagues described him as awkwardly paused whenever issues of authority arose, as if everyone knew the decision didn't rest with him anymore, yet he was still holding the title of head coach. This awkward limbo bled into preparation. Assistants weren't sure if Stefanski's offensive adjustments represented actual directives or just motions of going through the playbook. Meanwhile, the front office pushed their own preferences: install more play action, expand rollout concepts, design vertical attack routes to maximize Sanders' skill set. Were assistants implementing Stefanski's game plan or Haslam's vision? Nobody truly knew. And then came the morale crisis. Some staffers feared their own reputations might take collateral damage, getting lumped into the dysfunction when their resumes hit future job searches. Others felt rejuvenation, privately whispering that ownership had finally forced the obvious. If Sanders was ready, why delay? This divide wasn't loud, but it was deep. For an NFL staff, where alignment matters as much as schemes, split allegiance kills momentum. Through it all, one thread kept surfacing. Leadership had slipped from the coach's grasp and landed, temporarily, in the hands of a rookie quarterback. Sanders was already leading huddles, staying late in meeting rooms, and doing damage control with assistants who looked unsettled. It was extraordinary. In the vacuum Stefanski left, the 21-year-old filled the space. By midweek, you could feel two Browns organizations operating in the same building: Stefanski and the shrinking circle around him, and a new, ownership-backed movement orbiting around Sanders. It wasn't overt mutiny, but it was close. The fallout was clear. Stefanski retained the title of head coach, but the title no longer came with power, and everyone in the building knew it. But if the coaches felt adrift, the players didn't. Their response wasn't cautious. They erupted in enthusiasm, and it was in the locker room, not the coach's room, where Sanders' promotion truly began reshaping the season. If the coaching staff was left in stunned silence, the locker room's reaction couldn't have been more different. For weeks, frustration had bubbled just below the surface. Receivers shaking their heads after underthrown balls, defensive captains muttering about wasted efforts, and group texts full of "how long until they wake up?" Now the message flashed across everyone's phones: Shedeur was starting. Relief, celebration, and, for some veterans, validation. Players who had watched Sanders light up practice reps felt like the organization had finally caught up to reality. According to multiple insiders, within minutes of the memo going out, the team's private group chat blew up with fire emojis, gifs of champagne popping, even old Deion Sanders highlights as a subtle nod to the rookie's lineage. These weren't just teammates. These were grown men who'd been quietly pulling for a kid to finally get his shot. The most vocal enthusiasm came from the receiver's room. They'd been the ones running endless routes, only to see passes float late or die before reaching them. Sanders had already earned their loyalty by dragging them out for extra work after practice, focusing on timing and red zone execution long before he was named starter. Now, they were practically giddy. According to one source, Amari Cooper organized an unsanctioned workout with Shedeur that very evening, texting the group within an hour of the announcement. "Bring your cleats, we're rolling tonight." And they did, gathering under dim practice lights, running routes with the man they finally believed could unlock their potential. Defensive leaders were no less thrilled. For them, the change represented something deeper, the return of complementary football. For weeks, they'd been burning themselves out, forcing turnovers and putting the offense in position, only to watch it squandered by 3-and-outs. One veteran linebacker reportedly said, "We're tired of playing perfect defense just to lose 17-13. Now at least, we got a chance." That sentiment coursed throughout the unit. Suddenly, their work might actually matter again. In person, the locker room atmosphere turned almost celebratory. Sources described players slapping Sanders on the back, offering to run extra drills, even offensive linemen promising, "We'll buy you time, kid." This wasn't cautious politeness toward a rookie. This was full-scale buy-in, a team exhaling after weeks of pent-up tension. And Sanders? He met the moment with that same calm professionalism he had shown all along. No gloating, no "I told you so." Instead, he addressed teammates directly. "We're not rewinding. We're not looking back. We're moving forward, and I'll do my part to lead it." The words weren't flashy, but the delivery mattered. Players reportedly described it as steadying, like someone finally steering the ship after weeks of drifting. Notably, Gabriel himself handled the news with grace, congratulating Sanders in front of the locker room and offering to help prepare for the Packers matchup. That professionalism earned him respect from teammates, even if everyone knew his demotion had been unavoidable. But the truth is, once the decision was made, the mood shifted fast. Doubt and disillusionment were replaced with something Cleveland hadn't felt in years: belief. Veteran players who had already checked out mentally were suddenly texting family members saying, "This might turn around." The contrast with the coaching staff was striking. While assistants wrestled with fractured authority, the locker room rallied behind one undeniable fact: they finally had their quarterback. And in professional football, belief spreads quickly when the locker room aligns against the odds. Across the league, scouts and analysts always repeat the same mantra: a house divided never wins. For weeks, the Browns were splitting in two, coaches dragging their heels, players biting their tongues, fans abandoning faith. But with that one announcement, the balance flipped. Ownership had sided with what players already knew, and now there was no going back. The mood was electric, but still cautious. Players understood the storm brewing above them. Stefanski's diminished role, the unusual ownership intervention, the uproar from national media. Yet none of that seemed to matter in the moment. Inside the locker room, the message was clear. They were finally united behind their guy. What that unity couldn't erase, though, was the question every player still whispered in private. What happens next to their head coach? Would the team survive the season with fractured leadership? Or had Haslam's intervention created one leader too many? For most rookies, being thrust into a quarterback controversy this early would feel overwhelming. The noise alone, Media criticism, fan revolts, coaching politics has buried plenty of promising prospects before their stories even began. But Shedeur Sanders seemed to exist in a different headspace. Where others cracked, he got sharper. Where most might lash out publicly, he stayed quiet, professional, and relentlessly focused. It started the very day of the announcement. When Haslam's bombshell filtered down, teammates were buzzing, assistants were scrambling, and media crews were already prepping hot takes for the evening shows. Sanders, he simply walked into the meeting room with his playbook under his arm, sat down, and asked, "What's the plan this week?" There was no grand celebration, no smug victory lap. He approached it as though this was always supposed to be the job. That calm, steady demeanor rippled. Veteran players noticed first. One assistant recalled the coaches looked rattled. Sanders didn't. He looked like he'd been here for 3 years. Instead of soaking in the spotlight, he immediately shifted focus toward preparation. By that afternoon, he was asking coordinators what wrinkles they wanted added for the Packers, pestering linemen about protection adjustments, and joking lightly with receivers to break the tension. In just hours, he turned from a story happening to him, the benched rookie caught in franchise drama, into the story's anchor. And media crews were already prepping hot takes for the evening shows. Sanders, he simply walked into the meeting room with his playbook under his arm, sat down, and asked, "What's the plan this week?" There was no grand celebration, no smug victory lap. He approached it as though this was always supposed to be the job. That calm, steady demeanor rippled. Veteran players noticed first. One assistant recalled the coaches looked rattled. Sanders didn't. He looked like he'd been here for 3 years. Instead of soaking in the spotlight, he immediately shifted focus toward preparation. By that afternoon, he was asking coordinators what wrinkles they wanted added for the Packers, pestering linemen about protection adjustments, and joking lightly with receivers to break the tension. In just hours, he turned from a story happening to him, the benched rookie caught in franchise drama, into the story's anchor. That mentality spread. Position coaches who had considered checking out emotionally suddenly leaned in again. Veterans who'd been rolling their eyes at the dysfunction started believing in preparation this week. Not because ownership decreed a change, but because Sanders made them trust the shift wouldn't send the building into chaos. And the players themselves fed off it. Receivers noticed he never flinched when asked to throw extra routes after long practices. Offensive linemen noted his habit of thanking them after extended blocking drills, small gestures that signaled he respected their effort. Leadership, even when unspoken, is about consistency. And to them, Sanders already felt consistent. What stood out most was how Sanders refused to lean into the circus around him. He didn't repost fan memes about finally starting, didn't respond to cryptic social media barbs tossed at Stefanski, didn't take subliminal victory laps in interviews. Instead, he used media availability to praise teammates, credit Gabriel's professionalism, and emphasize team unity. The rookie could have fanned flames. Instead, he poured water on them. That choice mattered. Browns fans had been boiling with resentment. The city was ready to explode with reckless energy. But Sanders' poise reframed the narrative. Instead of coming across as an entitled rookie hungry for revenge, he came across as a steady rising star, one ready to shoulder pressure and represent both his teammates and his community with maturity. For the first time in weeks, Cleveland had a figure they could rally around who wasn't an owner, wasn't a coach, and wasn't a corporate talking head. He was their quarterback, finally in position, acting, day by day, word by word, like he had been here all along. And while Sanders' composure calmed the storms inside the building, outside it, the media frenzy only grew louder. Because nationally, his sudden ascension wasn't seen just as a promotion. It was seen as a referendum on his coach, his owner, and the Browns as a whole. The morning Sanders was officially promoted to starter, Cleveland might have been buzzing, but across the country, the conversation instantly erupted into wildfire. Sports talk shows that normally dedicate 5 minutes to the Browns suddenly centered entire blocks around the decision. And it wasn't just the move itself that fascinated the media. It was how it happened. Because owners don't usually rip power from their coaches in the middle of the season. In fact, that level of interference is something pundits often slam as heavy-handed or dysfunctional. But in this case, analysts were nearly unanimous. The Browns had no choice. On ESPN's Get Up, one panelist declared, "This is less about meddling and more about correcting malpractice." Former coach Rex Ryan, never one to sugarcoat, publicly blasted Stefanski's decision to bury Sanders in the first place, calling it an ego play that nearly drove the team off a cliff. Even usually measured voices like Booger McFarland agreed. Sometimes the head coach becomes so stubborn that someone above has to step in. If this is what it took, the Browns might have just saved their season. Fox Sports' morning lineup leaned into the cultural weight. Shannon Sharpe, who had already been critical of Sanders' benching weeks before, leaned across the desk and said, "Let's be honest. That kid had the locker room and the city weeks ago. Everyone but one man saw it. Now the Browns finally did what they should have done all along." Social media took shareable clips of Sharpe's monologue and blasted them across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Within hours, the hashtag "finally starting" was trending. And it wasn't just the media feeding the frenzy. Former players were vocal, and some were brutal. Michael Irvin questioned aloud how a team could watch Sanders torch veterans in practice and call him anything less than ready. Tony Dungy, known for his calm, rarely emotional takes, simply said the Browns had no plan. They had a paradox, and now they've been forced into the only answer that ever made sense. When Hall of Famers, Super Bowl winners, and former coaches align in agreement, the narrative hardens quickly. Cleveland had been stubborn, and Sanders had been wronged. Nothing. The way Sanders carried himself only added to the support. In nationally aired clips, he gave credit to Gabriel for helping him prepare, praised teammates for their effort, and downplayed the drama. To fans, and especially critics, this wasn't just maturity, it was leadership. As one NBC analyst put it, if that's how Shedeur Sanders acts in chaos, wait until he's leading in stability. That's a franchise quarterback. Sponsors noticed too. Just days before, whispers swirled of frozen campaigns and cautious advertisers wary of backing a benched rookie. Now, brand managers openly celebrated the decision. One analyst joked that Nike had probably been sweating bullets before the move, knowing Sanders' jersey sales had slowed. But the moment the promotion dropped, Fanatics' online store reportedly crashed for an hour as fans rushed to order updated gear. Cleveland didn't just earn cheers, they reignited commercial momentum. But the loudest takeaway from the national chatter was Stefanski's future. Almost every outlet framed the move as more than a quarterback switch. It was an indictment of coaching stubbornness. Would he survive the season after such a public stripping of power? On ESPN Radio, Mike Greenberg bluntly asked, "How do you walk into a locker room after ownership makes that call and still command respect?" Former coaches echoed the sentiment. If you lose authority, you don't get it back. The Browns' sudden relevance also created ripple effects for TV networks. Executives who had cringed at the idea of broadcasting Cleveland games under Gabriel were suddenly grinning. One Fox Sports production insider admitted, "When Shedeur's in, the games feel national. They feel like an event." Broadcasters don't just want competitive football, they want stars. And now, the Browns had theirs. From Wall Street to sports bars, the message was the same. Sanders being named starter wasn't a Cleveland story. It had instantly become a league story, one that blended football with culture, business with branding, and coaching stubbornness with ownership power. And while the city of Cleveland threw a street party atmosphere over the news, the reality remained. Nationally, the spotlight wasn't just on Sanders' first start. The real question America was asking was pointed directly at Stefanski's chair. Could a coach survive after losing the one battle no NFL coach can afford to lose? Control. If ownership's decision shocked the football world, it detonated like fireworks across Cleveland itself. For weeks, the fan base had seethed. Boycotts, paper bags over heads, and chants of "Free Shedeur" echoing through stadiums. That Tuesday morning, however, all that fury transformed in an instant. The moment the news broke, social media lit up with Cleveland pride the way it hadn't in years. Hashtags like #SandersEra and #FinallyQB1 surged into national trends. Instagram reels showed fans sprinting into local sporting goods stores to grab jerseys. One video of a mom surprising her son with a fresh number 2 Sanders jersey exploded past 1 million views in under a day. The narrative had flipped. Pain into celebration. Anger into belief. Downtown nightlife reflected it almost immediately. That evening, sports bars across the city filled to capacity on what should have been a quiet midweek gap. Bartenders said it felt like playoff night. It was like we'd beaten Pittsburgh in prime time, one Cleveland manager admitted. Except it wasn't even a game. It was just an announcement. Crowds spilled onto sidewalks, singing, chanting, and documenting it all on TikTok, as though Sanders' promotion alone was a championship. For small business owners, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Reservation books suddenly filled. Jersey vendors reported record sales, and even long-stalled bar remodels were dusted off, as owners prepared for what felt like a second Christmas season, courtesy of Sanders Mania. One independent printer admitted he worked overnight cranking out homemade Sanders shirts because official merchandise sites had already crashed. "I couldn't keep up with the orders," he said. Everyone wanted in. The energy wasn't confined to the city's core. In suburbs and small towns across Northeast Ohio, fans threw impromptu tailgate-style gatherings just to watch highlight reels of Sanders from college and training camp. Local radio hosts reported listeners calling in, crying, saying they had tears of relief, just knowing they wouldn't have to endure another Sunday of Gabriel bootlegs and 3-and-outs. Even planned protests morphed into celebrations. Supporters who had intended to picket the team facility that week showed up with balloons and banners instead. Instead of chants calling for firings, they shouted, "We got Shedeur," and sang the fight song. If boycotts had been threatening to strangle the Browns financially, this sudden U-turn of goodwill was like oxygen to a suffocating franchise. The transformation was so swift that by Wednesday, Cleveland's local news stations were dispatching multiple crews across the city to cover Sanders' celebrations. One outlet showed couples moving dates for weddings and birthday parties so they wouldn't conflict with his first start against Green Bay. Another featured a fan who had tattooed QB1 under Sanders' name the very night of the announcement. In the team's own shop, the e-commerce system was overwhelmed. Fans hammered the site for Sanders jerseys within hours, causing temporary shutdowns. Staff scrambled to apologize to customers while simultaneously marveling at the surge. Orders poured in from far outside Ohio, California, Texas, even London. Cleveland hadn't just won back its own backyard. It had inadvertently gained a national fan surge. Of course, it wasn't all carefree. In the background of the euphoria, some fans admitted they were anxious about the cost. What if this burst of joy collapsed under the weight of rookie mistakes? What if ownership pulled another inexplicable U-turn? Clevelanders aren't strangers to disappointment. Yet even among the cautious, optimism radiated. One fan summed it up best outside a downtown bar. "Even if it's not perfect, at least it's ours now. We finally get to believe again." The sudden explosion of support revealed something larger than football. Fans weren't just celebrating a rookie starting. They were celebrating the rare moment when their voices had been heard. And in Cleveland, where years of losing seasons had conditioned people to expect to be ignored, that alone was powerful enough to turn anger into joy. Momentum was back. The city was buzzing like it hadn't in decades. But outside Cleveland's borders, another group was just as affected. The Packers, the rivals forced to rip up their scouting reports and face this new spark head-on. Cleveland wasn't the only place rattled by the announcement. In Green Bay, the Packers were deep into their usual weekly preparation when the news hit the wires. Shedeur Sanders had been named the Browns' starter. Almost overnight, their scouting reports became worthless. And more than that, their comfort evaporated. Until that moment, the Packers' defensive staff had been expecting the same conservative approach Cleveland had shown under Gabriel. Ground-heavy calls, safe reads, and short passing game. Nothing explosive, nothing unpredictable. They had prepped for it accordingly, installing pressure packages designed to suffocate a static offense. Now, that plan was trash. By Monday evening, the Packers' defensive coordinator called an emergency meeting. Assistants were told to rewrite the week's prep materials from scratch. This isn't the same team anymore, one staffer admitted to local media off the record. We went from game-managing tape to a highlight reel in 24 hours. The switch was that dramatic. The challenge wasn't just Sanders' talent, it was the lack of film. Opponents thrive on tendencies. By week 9, most rookies have revealed how they react to disguises, how they read coverages, and what parts of the field they avoid. With Sanders, there was barely anything. A sprinkle of preseason tape, some practice reports, and college clips that were useful but incomplete. NFL defenders need angles, not hype videos. What little preparation the Packers could cobble together only fueled unease. Sanders' mobility alone created nightmares. Under Gabriel, pass rushers could tee off knowing the pocket was stationary. With Sanders, every collapse risked turning into a 30-yard scramble or a rollout double move. Suddenly, defensive backs weren't just covering their assignments. They were terrified of coverage busts, breaking open explosive plays downfield. Even Packers players admitted publicly that their week had changed dramatically. One veteran cornerback told reporters, "You game plan for timing routes and dump-offs." Then suddenly you're told this kid throws lasers nobody else tries. That's different. Another defender admitted they started working extra sessions just on scramble drill defense, because if Sanders extended plays, discipline became critical. And Green Bay wasn't alone. Around the AFC North, rival teams quietly acknowledged they were paying attention. The Ravens, who had embarrassed Cleveland days earlier, were suddenly quoted saying, "Yes, this changes the rematch." Steelers insiders grumbled that facing Sanders twice a season could strip their defensive advantage. Even Bengals coaches admitted, off the record, that scouting reports had to be rewritten. That kind of respect is rare for a rookie who hasn't even started a game yet. But Sanders wasn't just another rookie. He was a complete offensive philosophy shift. The Packers' anxiety was compounded by the energy surrounding Cleveland. They weren't preparing to face a broken boot-off Browns team anymore. They were preparing to walk into a hornet's nest of fan belief, newly charged teammates, and a city ready to roar at historic decibels. Stadium film crews reported demand for Packers-Browns footage had doubled from broadcasters desperate to hype Sanders' debut. One NFC scout quipped on Twitter, "Green Bay didn't sign up to be the guinea pig in the Sanders experiment, but here they are." As midweek practices unfolded, Packers coaches wrestled with a true strategic dilemma. Play it safe with base coverages and risk Sanders carving them short, or gamble with blitzes and risk giving up highlight reel bombs. Neither choice felt comfortable. The entire building buzzed with the same theme: uncertainty. That's the thing about rookie phenoms. They're unpredictable. Defenses can prepare for what they know. They can't prepare for electricity. And right now, Sanders represented electricity, an opponent recalibrating the board for Green Bay and forcing rivals across the AFC North to take notice. For Cleveland, this was exactly what they dreamed of. For the Packers, it was a nightmare. But while Green Bay scrambled for answers, the real storm remained in Cleveland. A head coach whose authority had already collapsed. And now the national conversation was shifting again. Could Kevin Stefanski survive running a team that everyone knew he no longer controlled? When the dust from Haslam's unprecedented intervention began to settle, Cleveland felt different. Downtown bars packed midweek, optimism crackled through the locker room. And practice energy reached levels players said hadn't been seen in years. For the first time since draft night, it felt like the Browns had momentum. But behind the cheers, one question lingered. Was this really the turning point? Or just another temporary illusions in franchise history? Littered with false dawns. On one hand, the signs looked undeniable. Sanders' appointment lit a fire under players who had been close to checking out. Defensive starters, once bitter about carrying an offense that couldn't score, suddenly played as though there was purpose again. Receivers left stagnant under Gabriel, leaned into extra drills with new urgency. Even offensive linemen, once bristling under frustrated game plans, were buying in. One lineman reportedly told Sanders, "We'll keep you upright, don't worry." When belief returns to an NFL team, winning immediately feels possible. The fan base, too, felt reborn. What could have turned into a toxic boycott surged instead into celebration. Ticket sales skyrocketed overnight. Merchandising sites crashed under demand. Local businesses reported playoff-level weekends despite it being mid-season. The Browns went from being booed off their own field to the most talked-about team in football, with one personnel switch. As one sports economist quipped, "Sanders isn't just a quarterback, he's stimulus." And Sanders himself hadn't flinched. The poise, professionalism, and relentless preparation turned even doubters inside the building into believers. Rookies are... The fan base, too, felt reborn. What could have turned into a toxic boycott surged instead into celebration. Ticket sales skyrocketed overnight. Merchandising sites crashed under demand. Local businesses reported playoff-level weekends despite it being mid-season. The Browns went from being booed off their own field to the most talked-about team in football, with one personnel switch. As one sports economist quipped, "Sanders isn't just a quarterback, he's stimulus." And Sanders himself hadn't flinched. The poise, professionalism, and relentless preparation turned even doubters inside the building into believers. Rookies are one success, and he's hailed as savior, but one rocky outing, and critics could point back at Haslam's meddling as proof Cleveland is still Cleveland. League observers framed it bluntly. One executive told a national outlet, "This could become the moment Cleveland finally leaves dysfunction behind. Or it could become the proof that the Browns never learn." Both outcomes were plausible. If Sanders stabilized, the Browns would be seen as visionaries who embraced their guy just in time. But if implosion came, even through circumstances beyond his control, this whole saga would go down as yet another chapter in franchise tragedy. For fans, though, those worries felt distant. After years of enduring empty promises and deflated campaigns, the city finally had what it wanted. Hope. Pure, tangible hope. They weren't polishing trophies yet, but Clevelanders were filling bars, filling stadiums, and reminding each other what belief tasted like. For once, Sundays felt like holidays again. So, is this the turning point or another temporary fix? That part no one can answer yet. The next few weeks will write it. Maybe with Sanders at the center of an unlikely playoff push. Maybe with another ugly clash exposing deeper fractures. But in this moment, the Browns feel alive. And in Cleveland, that alone feels like a miracle.